And that clock is 2 minutes fast, isn't it?
I was going to say,
Are we good to go? What's that? Oh, mic. Okay. So we need to be on mic when we're speaking. Vicky, can you hear us? Can Vicky hear us? Well, I'm going to start just by saying hello and welcome, everyone. It's lovely to see you all here. Thank you for coming. And people coming at the back, do help yourself to coffee, croissants, come and join us. My name's Polly Curtis. I'm the Chief Executive at the think tank Demos. Welcome to our offices. Thank you for joining us today. This event is part of an ongoing programme we have around public service reform. And specifically around how we reform public services to be more relational, to put people at the heart of them, but in order to become more preventative, prevent problems from happening further down the track. And that's what you're going to hear about a lot today in the piece of work we've done focusing on homelessness with the Centre for Homelessness Impact. So we're delighted to be launching today a new Demos Centre for Homelessness Impact discussion paper. It's part of our Prevention in Practice series, and it looks at opportunities to better prevent homelessness in England. And I'm really delighted you're all here to discuss the findings of that, to learn more about it, and also to contribute your ideas to what could create a more preventative policy environment around homelessness. So just a bit of housekeeping. We'll try to stick till 11 o'clock finish. If we run over by a couple of minutes, it's because it's so interesting we can't help ourselves. Do stay for a chat afterwards. There'll be more coffee afterwards. Fire exit on the right. When we do questions from the floor, a mic will come round. Is that right? Yeah. Okay, great. So it's an exciting time to be talking about public service reform. It's back on the agenda. People are talking about it, that we can feel the election coming. And the pressure, I think, really from the public to come out with different ways of doing public services. I think there's a really kind of broad kind of understanding that public services aren't working for everyone. And in homelessness, you can see it on our streets. You know, I grew up in Camden. I watched homelessness through my childhood in Camden. I watched it disappear for 10 years, and I watched with shock about 10 years ago where there was street rough sleeping again in Camden. And it was a very kind of visceral experience of homelessness, walking past Camden Tube every day for me, and really seeing the results of policy and public spending kind of on people's lives in that way. Since 2010, the report will show that the number of people in temporary housing has doubled. It's a very kind of tangible difference we're seeing now. So this morning we are asking, how can we finally get upstream and prevent homelessness? And I'm delighted to have 4 speakers today who are extremely well placed to discuss these questions. We're first going to hear from Ben Glover, our head of social policy at Demos and co-author of the discussion paper, who's just going to take us all through the findings of that. We're then going to go to Paula Barker, MP, the Shadow Minister for Homelessness and Rough Sleeping. Welcome. And we have Vicky Spratt on screen, the housing correspondent at the iPaper, and I think the journalist who has made the biggest impact in this policy environment that I've ever really seen happening, I think. And then we're going to go to Ligia Teixeira, the Chief Executive of the Centre for Homelessness Impact, to give her thoughts and response to both the paper and what we hear here today. And we're very keen to get to audience participation as soon as possible, because I'm really excited that we've got such expertise within the audience here as well. So to start, a few minutes from Ben. Take us through the paper.
Sure. So thanks everyone for coming along this morning. Just want to say I'm very indebted to my co-authors, Alice Dawson, Rob Anderson, who are sat over there. And it's been great to work with the Centre for Homelessness Impact to write this paper. So really grateful for the support, and I hope I do it justice now. So I guess start with the bad news. The bad news is homelessness is on the rise. Depending on how you measure it, temporary accommodation is increasing, as Polly has said. and rough sleeping is on the rise. And I think that's probably why there's so many people here today and online. This is something which, as a country, we really need to get to grips with again. I think the good news is that some quite big and important questions are being asked about the way that we do public policy in this country, the way that public services are delivered. I think there is a genuine appetite to not just do more of the same. I think there is an increasing appetite across the political spectrum for change, for reform, and crucially to finally get upstream on so many of the social and economic problems that we see plaguing our country. And that's, I think, why prevention is firmly back on the agenda again. I know for those of you who have been around this world longer than me, prevention has been on the agenda before, and I think I'd like to just talk about why this time might be a little bit different. So this report at its core, I'm going to wave it. You should all have one on your seats, and I hope you kind of take it home and read it with interest and share it with colleagues. Is that we've essentially failed to actually get upstream tackling homelessness over the years, and too often we've focused on tackling the symptoms of homelessness. So we kind of focus on, to go a little bit wonky, 3 tiers of prevention in the paper. The first is primary prevention, and that's stopping homelessness before it happens. We talk about secondary prevention, which is kind of someone who's at risk of becoming homeless in the fairly immediate future, stopping them from becoming homeless. And then tertiary prevention is essentially, once someone has been homeless, how quickly can they recover and get out of homelessness? I'm just going to focus on primary prevention in my remarks this morning, but there's plenty more about the other tiers of prevention in the paper. And to really get to grips with primary prevention of homelessness, you need to look at the root causes of homelessness. And as we set out in the paper, homelessness is a manifestation of wider social and economic problems. Some people might call that inequality, some people might call that poverty. It's probably both. And if you're really going to tackle homelessness, you need to get on top of the grips of the root causes, which are essentially wider problems, often not related to housing, but in turn also related. And that kind of mirrors thinking which Michael Marmot has done over health in the last decade on identifying the wider social determinants of health. I think that's the way that we need to be thinking about preventing homelessness, is applying that very cross-sectoral, integrated approach. We can't just think about homelessness in isolation. And homelessness essentially happens when a number of complex and interacting factors manifest in someone's life and mean they can no longer afford to live somewhere, or they are made homeless. And we need to be trying to intervene in those interrelating factors. And as a result, it's kind of not really much surprise that the evidence suggests that the best way to prevent homelessness is to integrate it with other policy areas. You really need an integrated approach. So what does that mean? We need to look at health. We need to look at social security policy. We need to look at education policy, because all of these things interrelate with one another and can cause homelessness. And that's the only way you're really going to get on top of the issue. So to give one example, the government looks at homelessness in DLUC, but benefits decisions are made in DWP. Benefits decisions obviously have a huge impact on homelessness, but these issues are essentially considered in isolation too often by central government. And that's kind of, I think, really compounded by the fact that central government's approach to homelessness is often focused quite downstream. So, for example, the rough sleeping strategy, which I know many in the sector welcome, is essentially about looking at the symptoms rather than trying to get upstream. Where does that lead us? We need to focus on what we called in a recent essay, the foundations of people's lives. We need to look upstream beyond looking downstream all the time. And that means kind of a common vision for preventing homelessness. That's sort of the first and kind of major recommendation of this paper. And we can talk a little bit more about it in the discussion. And we think that needs to be adopted, and it needs to be underpinned by a really evidence-based, data-led framework. So I've sort of spoken about the bad news. I've spoken, I think, about the good news. I think I've tried to show what a different approach to tackling homelessness might look like. Will any of this happen? As I said, I'm sure many people have sat in rooms like this discussing think tank reports, calling for prevention. I think what is different this time is I think people at the top of politics are beginning to think differently about public policy challenges. I think missions are interesting. Obviously, the Labour Party is very interested in missions. The government to give it credit where credit is due, has put kind of missions at the heart of its levelling up strategy. So there's a kind of cross-party interest in using missions as a way of solving cross-cutting problems and trying to get outside of policy silos, which have just so often plagued areas like homelessness. So I'm kind of teeing up to hear from Paula around how we think a kind of missions framework might work for tackling something like homelessness. I know it's not kind of currently in Labour's 5 missions, but I think it's a really interesting approach for tackling something which clearly cuts across so many different policy areas. So yeah, I'd urge you all to read the report. There's plenty more in there, but that's just sort of overview of the argument and some of the key points.
And thank you so much. Thank you for that. I think you teed up Paula very well. Paula, do you want to respond to that and set out some of your thinking around prevention at the moment?
Yes.
And just to say, we understand no spending commitments this week.
Thanks, Polly, and thank you for inviting me. Not least because you've earned me lots of brownie points with my husband, who said to me this week, I see you're speaking at Demos. And I said, I am. And he said, I get their newsletter every week. And he said, that's really cool. So thank you for making me a very cool wife. Any brownie points from husband and kids always works for me. And it is really, really fantastic to read the report. Thank you so much. Thank you for the introduction and basically making sense about what has been in my head since October last year, when I was actually appointed as Shadow Minister for Homelessness and Rough Sleeping. And it is wonderful to be in the room with Lydia, who I've worked with for some time now, and Greg as well, and just the sector really in general, who has shown me such time and kindness and respect with their willingness to engage with me and start formulating our policy offer really going forward into the next general election. And as Polly has already said, unfortunately, I can't give you any sort of big ticket items today. I would love to be able to do that, but I think that you would all acknowledge that we are going to inherit a very dire economic situation if we do indeed form a Labour government at the next general election, and all our commitments will be fully costed. But what I can say is that we are resolutely committed to effective delivery and implementation of policies against that backdrop, which will be so incredibly challenging. And it's not an easy task, but I know that as frontline experts, you will be on hand to support the next government that is willing to engage with you. So I've been doing all I can to raise the profile of this issue, and it's an issue that I care deeply about. And it's really, really interesting to read the report, because from the outset, you do show that the polling shows 75% of UK adults believe that more should be done to tackle homelessness. You've correctly highlighted in the report that historically, limited attention has been given to wider government policy levers in the likes of health and education, and talked about cross-departmental working, which I'll come on to in a second. So I suppose, to put it succinctly, I completely concur with your analysis, and thank you for pulling this together. And I think you've hit the nail on the head, Ben, when you say that too often government departments work in silos, and that's something that hugely frustrates me, and something that I want to change if I'm fortunate enough to retain a position as Minister for Homelessness and Rough Sleeping. So if I am indeed in that seat when the music stops, cross-departmental working will be at the heart of any policy going forward. And I see that, excuse me, from number 10 and cabinet level down, across all departments, with all cabinet ministers and also key civil servants, in pulling together in the same direction. And most of you in the room will remember, at the last Labour government, by the time we left office in 2010, we had practically eradicated homelessness and rough sleeping. And that was very much a model that was used then, and that was headed up by Baroness Louise Casey, and she did some absolutely fantastic work. So in terms of what I've been doing over the last few months, I've been actively engaging with partners and stakeholders to hear their ideas, and this weekend we'll see the Party's National Policy Forum meet in Nottingham. And meaning that this time next week, we will better understand the thinking of Labour members and that of our affiliates in respect of homelessness. And I'd like to thank everyone in the sector, including Demos, for feeding into that MPF process, because that has been hugely beneficial to us. So it is too early to say, but the mood music is positive in terms of the internal processes and the focus on homelessness prevention. So it doesn't matter how many homes we build, and believe me, we do need to build homes, and an incoming Labour government will build homes. But we will need to act in the first 12, 18, 24 months to put a brake on rising homelessness rates and reduce them where we can. And the next government must make moves in that initial period to grasp hold of a deteriorating picture of those facing life at the sharp end. And charity after charity, council after council have repeatedly told me that any strategy must be geared to address homelessness in all its forms. And I share that aspiration. So in terms of my thought process, I've tried to pull my policy ideas under 3 strands, and those strands are ending rough sleeping, temporary accommodation that is short, safe and healthy, and preventing and breaking the cycle of homelessness. I'm taking that 3rd strand of breaking and preventing the cycle of homelessness, that must be given the utmost priority. Getting upstream, as you've said, identifying problems or vulnerable groups early, intervening early, is something that all our institutions should be geared towards. And so often people become homeless as they are passed between institutions, and too many people actually fall through the cracks. The care leaver, the prison leaver, the domestic abuse victim, the veteran, and even as the Kerslake Commission identified, the rough sleeper that has been discharged from hospital only to go back on the street and then back in hospital. So we can and we must do better. The disjointed nature of mental health support, drug and alcohol services mean that the most vulnerable people in our society are passed from pillar to post. So our prevention agenda must be geared towards health inequalities, both in respect of triage and then following right through to the outcomes. And what I feel very strongly about is that anybody who is homeless or has had to rough sleep has often suffered trauma in their life. It may be that you are a young person with mental health problems. It may be that you have got issues in the family because you are exploring your sexuality and family at home can't come to terms with that. It may be domestic abuse, but trauma is often at the heart of those who present as homeless or rough sleeping. So I really want to gear an agenda that is focused on trauma and statutory services, providing services that are both trauma informed and trauma led. And I think that is hugely, hugely important. So as Polly has already said, whilst I can't commit to policies on the hoof today, I am really, really interested in all those facets that I've talked about. So I'm not going to go on much more, but what I do want to say is that Labour are ambitious about this plan, and we've got to continue to be ambitious, because being less than ambitious and bold is not an option in this particular area. People expect more from us than they do from a Conservative government on tackling issues like homelessness, and we are expected to take it more seriously, and in my opinion, rightly so, because it does go to the core of who we are as a party. And I'm often reminded of Harold Wilson's words, the Labour Party is a moral crusade, or it is nothing. And I think that is absolutely right, because for those facing life at the sharp end and the most vulnerable people in our communities, we must be that moral crusade for them. And that must be our mission. And I very, very much want to make it our mission. So thank you once again for having me here. And this morning, I hope, is just the start of a very fruitful relationship between myself and Demos going forward in the months ahead as we build towards the general election and hopefully what will be an incoming Labour government that will see the issue of homelessness prevention put front and centre. So thank you.
Oh, Paula, thank you so much for that, and thank you for sharing as much as you can at a kind of difficult moment in the cycle. So thank you. Vicky, everything you're hearing about prevention, and particularly those three kind of tiers of prevention, getting right upstream beyond the kind of signs and then intervening at particular moments, and then the final kind of stopping repeat homelessness. How does that relate to what you see when you're out and about reporting on homelessness in the world? What are we doing on? Oh no. What do we? Hold on 1 minute. We can't quite hear you. We're just going to play with some numbers. Bear with us just 1 second. Try again. And you're not on mute, no. What's that? The connection on the owl? No. Well, you'd hear something. I tell you what, Vicky, should we go to leisure and then we'll come back to you, and Samaya will message you and try and sort out the sound. I'm sorry about this. It's like amateur 2020 hour again. So sorry, but we will sort it out. Do you want to give us your kind of thoughts and reflections on what you've been hearing this morning?
Yes, thank you so much. Is this working? It's a real pleasure to be here today at the Center for Homelessness Impact. Our mission is to be a catalyst for evidence-led change. And we found that many gaps exist, but this is often not one of them. I think everyone agrees, and there's a huge amount of consensus around the fact that prevention is better than cure. And yet progress has been slow. So it's fantastic to be doing this with Demos, precisely because we feel that one of the most important things that needs to happen is to enhance education and awareness amongst the general public, because we all know that if the public care about addressing the root causes of homelessness and understand what prevention involves, and the fact that it's not just the individuals affected that suffer, but the whole of society, if certain individuals are excluded from being their best selves, we all suffer. So this work is about creating a better society for all. So it's a real pleasure to be here. In terms of the known knowns, I think, as the report very much highlights, we know that universal prevention, there's some important gaps, and the gaps could become even bigger in the year ahead. So it's really important that immediate and urgent action is taken. Again, that's one of the reasons why we wanted to be here today. It's really important that people have access to the financial assistance they need, for instance, and that they're able to do that quickly. It's really important that they're able to access employment support, legal support, counseling. It's much easier to be able to support people who might be at risk of losing their tenancies than dealing with the aftermath. Again, trauma has, been mentioned already. The experience of homelessness, we know it's something that stays with people, not just in the short term, medium term, but longer term. It's a life-defining experience. Again, this is why we feel that early years needs to be given even more attention. Again, if there's an opportunity area that I think it's worth investing in, is really making sure that children that might be at risk of homelessness are identified early. So we've recently came across a a really interesting model that started in Australia that could be quite promising in terms of helping identify children and families who might be at risk. It's currently being trialed in Wales and could be of real interest, we believe, in England. So early years, I hope it's something that we get to talk about more today. Another area is, of course, and I'm sure Vicky will have lots to say about that. It's affordable housing. We're still not building enough houses, and there's nothing new about that. And it might well involve, even more urgent reforms to planning laws. But why is it taking so long? And certainly the target of 300,000 homes, all the analysis we've done and come across suggests that that's not a high enough target to make up for the backlog. So what can be done about this, and what would a future Labour government do about this? I think it's a really good question to be discussing as well. And then we're also very interested in the role of communities. We know that grassroots organizations, volunteering, led charities play a really important role in preventing people from becoming homeless, or could play an even more important role. So what opportunities are there to engage even more effectively with community groups? And what can be done, again, in schools, in universities, amongst the business community, for that involvement to be even more meaningful and support initiatives around affordable housing. So these are all questions that come up in the report, and that we're very interested in hearing from everyone here today, and of course from Paula as time progresses in the run-up to the general election. But if there's one message I think that everyone should take away from the discussion paper and from our work in general in this area, is very much that homelessness is not inevitable, it is preventable. So it's very much up to us to do something about it. Thank you.
Fascinating, thank you. I actually wanted to come straight back with a question about that Wales, Australia example. Can you tell us a bit more about what that kind of pilot is doing? And is it to prevent homelessness for families, or to prevent homelessness for future adults?
Yeah, so both. It's a really good question. So the model involves essentially serving all kids attending school, and those that are deemed to be at risk, being offered additional support. So in Australia, when it was first piloted, it led to a reduction of 40% in kids as they become adults accessing the homelessness system, which is what you want to see. And it's also led to a reduction of 20% in terms of dropout. So again, another thing that if kids are affected by homelessness, they're much more likely to be absent from school and to drop out the educational system altogether. So that's what this particular intervention is doing. It's just an example of things that we could be doing to involve the mainstream system, more formally in the homelessness prevention system. It already is. Don't get me wrong. The health system is part of the homelessness prevention system. So is the education system, but they could be doing more. So this is an example of a promising intervention that is currently being piloted in Wales, but certainly we would love to see it in England and the rest of the UK as well.
How fascinating. Really, really interesting to hear. And two really powerful messages there. Homelessness is preventable. There is evidence for that. And I think your point around particular urgency now in the cost of living crisis, knowing that this is getting worse day by day, leads us to the question, which I think we'll come on to after Vicky's had a chance to speak, which is, why isn't this happening? I mean, this is so obviously the way to go. What are the blockers? But I'm going to come to Vicky, and fingers crossed. No. What do you think's happening?
Have you selected the right speaker?
Yeah.
Change it to the owl.
Change to try on the owl. Sorry, bear with us, everyone. I'm just getting more and more. Vicky, it's got to be good because we're now building up.
Choose the owl as the speaker.
Yeah.
Let's try that.
Try again.
Way!
Well done. Thank you, Andrew. Big drink coming your way. Vicky.
Can you hear me?
Perfectly.
Oh wait, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Well, it's a brilliant report, and I think we obviously need to have strategies to prevent homelessness, and I think all of the ones you've identified are really key. But I am starting to worry that we're overcomplicating something that, to me, increasingly, as I travel around this country and meet people who are experiencing homelessness, seems incredibly simple. I think it's really important not to conflate two things: rough sleeping and people who are in temporary accommodation, two distinct and distinctly different issues. Rough sleeping is a little bit more complicated. I was in a day shelter in Canterbury last week, meeting with people who are either currently rough sleeping or have recently been housed and still need support, because the experience of homelessness stays with you once you've been on the streets. It doesn't just disappear overnight. And I think, that is somewhere where you will find complex needs, addiction issues, mental health and trauma. But actually that's a group of, we think, a few thousand people, maybe more. The stats aren't particularly reliable. It is complicated, but I also think that's quite easy to prevent. Give people who are on the streets a home. It's called Housing First, then work to support their needs. That's what this day shelter was doing. I met a guy who he had an alcohol problem and childhood trauma, and actually being given a home had completely changed his life. He got sober, he was in touch with his children again, his whole life had changed. And I think stories like that make me realize how important getting people off the streets is. But there's a bigger issue here, which is what was once often described as hidden homelessness. I'm not really sure what we're calling it now. None of the terms really seem adequate to me. But I don't think that people, and by the way, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people, many of whom are families with children. Some of them are domestic abuse survivors, that's true. Some of them do have complex needs, but I'm not sure they're inherently traumatized, as we've been discussing. I'll tell you what's traumatic is being evicted or not being able to pay your rent or your mortgage. This is something I write about in my book. When I was 11 years old, bailiffs knocked on the door of my family home. Was I traumatized before that, or was that a traumatic experience? We need to be stopping that happening to people. The leading cause of homelessness in this country is not having trauma or substance abuse problems. It's being evicted by a private landlord, because we do not have enough social housing. We have more low-income families living in privately rented homes than we do living in social housing. It's so straightforward. To prevent homelessness, we've got to build social housing. I was revisiting a 2004 report by Dame Kate Barker, who's an economist, was recently on the MPC this morning. She wrote that then when we had a Labour government, and we've not managed to solve it. This is not that difficult. I'm visiting a woman later this week who is currently experiencing homelessness. Why? Because she was evicted by her landlord. So she's been moved from Woolwich to a travel lodge in Croydon. She's got an autistic son. She's commuting 3 hours to the school in Woolwich that her son has to go to because of his complex needs. What does she do with her day? She waits in Woolwich for him to finish school and then goes back to Croydon. It's absolutely absurd out there. And I think I'm just really starting to become incredibly frustrated by hearing it talked about in such complex terms, because it seems so simple to me. And in 10 years of reporting on this, it's only becoming more simple, which is prevent homelessness by making sure people have homes. And I think the strategies outlined in this report are so important because they look at every stage of how you can do that. And it just needs to become a sort of national strategy in the same way that we looked at the NHS when we first founded the NHS. Prevention is better than cure. We now spend more on housing benefit than the total spend of most government departments. It's absolutely bonkers. We are wasting money because people don't have affordable homes. Social housing is a national asset. The rent goes back into the state. At the moment, lots of that money is going to private landlords because lots of social homes were sold off through right to buy. It's just, to me, it's seeming more and more crackers. And I think these strategies are really vital, but I'm meeting people who are so desperate, and they are not inherently vulnerable. They are being made vulnerable by a system that doesn't function, by the fact that rents are out of control and there's nothing we can really do about it, because buy-to-let landlords are at the mercy of the banks, who are at the mercy of the global economy. That's why we have a welfare state. That's why we built social housing in the first place, to indemnify us against disasters like this. So I suppose, to sum up, we absolutely need prevention. All of these strategies are brilliant, but I'm starting to become really, really nervous about making it sound more complicated than it is. We just need homes for rough sleepers, get them off the streets, make sure that all of their needs can be treated. And for people who are in the private rented sector and at risk of eviction, they absolutely need to be in social housing, and that needs to be properly funded. And I really thought 10 years ago when I started this beat that I'd be onto something else by now. And I'd really, really like to be writing about something else. But for that to happen, this needs to stop.
Thank you for that challenge and provocation. Absolutely fascinating. If it's that simple, why hasn't it happened? What's your analysis of why someone hasn't, why the government hasn't bit the bullet and sorted it out?
I think it's myopia, and it's a political choice. Spend the money. You save it elsewhere. It's costing us so much money for people to be homeless. Spend the money, commit to it. And I think in fairness to the Tories, they are going to miss their own manifesto commitment to end rough sleeping. I think it was by 2024. That's obviously not going to happen. It's completely their own fault. But in fairness to the current housing secretary, Michael Gove, I think he's being reined in slightly, but he gets it. And he has spoken about the need to build social housing in order to sort all of this out. And, you've got a department for housing with a housing secretary who wants to fix this, who can't, because DWP have frozen housing benefit at 2019, 2020 levels, and the Treasury won't increase the Affordable Homes Programme, and a party fighting amongst itself about whether we should have house building targets. And I understand why Labour aren't currently announcing policies, and I'm speaking to people in the Labour Party every week about that, but we really just need to make it sound simple. All of the polling that we've recently been doing over at the Eye, which has been kindly done for us by YouGov, shows that the public want this. They think that governments for the last 2 decades haven't built enough social homes. I don't even think it's controversial at this point. And I think the cost of living crisis is going to do a lot to reinforce that, because what we're seeing, kind of like my own family's story, what makes you homeless is not being able to afford your home. Well, now renters increasingly can't afford their homes. Low income renters can't find anywhere they can afford to rent on housing benefit, but also lower income households with mortgages are being hit by this. So it's moving up the sort of the wealth scale, and now even being a homeowner isn't going to protect you from the risk of homelessness. So I hope that politicians are going to go where the public opinion is, but they need to hurry up.
With that, I'm going to open it up to the floor, because I think that's a really good provocative moment to get the temperature in the room. Does anyone have thoughts, reflections, questions for any of the panelists? Lady at the back. Yeah, do we need to do the mic? Thank you. So the mic doesn't help in the room, it helps the audience online at home, just so you know why we're all talking.
Yeah, because you can all hear me. Hi, Anna Clark from the Housing Forum. I just wanted to pick up on the point that Paula was making around sort of cross-party support, and picking up on everything that Vicky's just said, really, about that, people aren't necessarily traumatised when they become homeless. And if you look at homelessness rates across the country, we can see so clearly that they're far higher in London, the numbers in temporary accommodation and rough sleeping. That's not because everybody's traumatised in London, it's because it's far, far harder to find housing in London. Brilliant to hear that you're talking about interdepartmental working. So I really hope that you're picking up conversations with the DWP about the local housing allowance limit, because not inflating them with inflation just seems an absurd thing to do when this is the benefit that most, half of low income renters are reliant on to pay on their rent. And the other thing around house building, I think Vicky has perhaps made it sound simpler than it is to build housing. Our members, we work across sectors, so it's local authority, public and private sectors. It's incredibly hard to build housing at the moment. And Labour have been saying some really good things, implying that you'll keep the housing target targets that you want to build housing. I don't doubt that you do really want to build housing, but getting to grips with the how you do it and what compromises you need to make, because there are compromises. There are government departments, DEFRA and Natural England, opposing housing in half the country at the moment, grinding house building to a halt because of environmental legislation. So I really hope that you can get to grips with the detail of what needs to be done, because there's such a strong link with homelessness and housing.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm going to back. I think just one thing. Thank you. One thing I think we should kind of just agree on at this point is that there are lots of different things happening for different people when they become homeless, and really getting to grips with the range of experiences is important for designing kind of the policy solutions that kind of target at the right levels of prevention. So, maybe the interesting thing to do with the next step of this work is to think about segmenting the experiences so that we can really work out where to put the emphasis in the range of policy responses that you'll need. To Vicky's point, Paula, do you want to pick up on welfare and house building?
Yeah, thanks, Anna. And you make totally salient points. And I think we are committed to targets. We are committed to building. We do have to get round the environmental issues, you said. We do have to get round the planning legislation issues that Lydia was talking about. You'll have heard my colleague Matt Pennycook, who is the Shadow Minister for Housing, talk about house building. And there was a little bit of controversy a few weeks ago about would we build on the green belt? And a lot of people were horrified when Matt said, well, yeah, actually we will. But I think people have a rose-tinted view that, what we're going to do is we're going to bring the bulldozers into parks and open spaces and start, house building initiatives, when actually a lot of sort of the green belt is actually disused car parks, disused petrol stations, and that's what we're actually talking about. And I think if you were to ask the majority of the public, would they prefer decent, affordable social housing rather than a disused petrol station or a disused car park at the end of the road, I think they would probably bite your hand off, quite frankly. So I think that's what he was talking about. In terms of local housing allowance, absolutely spot on. It was one of the first conversations that I started with. I don't need to tell you that the sums are literally eye-watering. So I think that will probably be a more medium to long-term aim. It certainly is not something that is going to be agreed in the short term, but it's something that I am really battering the door down to the Shadow Treasury team. I'm speaking to colleagues from DWP and all the departments, because I am serious about this being a truly cross-departmental approach. And I just wanted to mention something that Vicky said. Let me just... So she talked about housing first, and I think you're spot on, Vicky. I mean, I'm a huge advocate of the Housing First initiative. I've visited a number of Housing First up and down the country. And when I first came in, I spoke to Polly about a gentleman that I met called Adrian in Manchester, and he was part of the Housing First project. And a bit like the person you spoke about, Vicky, he had had drugs and alcohol addictions. He got clean. He's now seeing his children, which is fantastic. And we were talking about hope. And he said to me, Paula, hope is great, but, it's not an outcome. Giving someone a future is what really matters. And that's what Housing First has given me. And that's what I want a future incoming Labour government to do. I want us to provide the hope because the hope is important. But more importantly, I want an incoming Labour government to provide people with futures. And that's not just in the homelessness and housing sectors. That's in their everyday lives with every government department that touches them. I think it's really important that we provide that future.
Thank you. Thank you. Vicky, did you want to come back on that point?
Yeah, it's really good to hear you talk about that, Paula. And I mean, I know you've spoken about Housing First and you've spoken about it really well in the past. I think I'm just really struck at the moment by the fact that we have the future King of England rolling out Housing First strategy. I'll just leave that there. I mean, we have the Crown doing the work of government right now.
Totally with you on that, absolutely. And just to go back to the other thing you mentioned as well about the government will miss its targets by the end of this Parliament. I mean, you'll probably have seen me say many times at the dispatch box, ad nauseum really, and boring people to death. But I keep talking about, ending Section 21 eviction notices because that is a huge concern, and that could stop. And we've now got this mortgage crisis, and it's not just people in the private rented sector, as Vicky said. People are going to be losing their homes because they can't afford mortgages as well. And what the standard response from government is that we will bring forward legislation as soon as parliamentary time allows. Well, I can tell you that the last few weeks we have had early finishes. We normally work till at least 10 on a Monday, 7 on a Tuesday and Wednesday, and we've been finishing a lot earlier. So the parliamentary time is there, make no mistake about it. What is missing is the political will of this government to bring forward the legislation that would make people's lives better.
Thank you. I'm keen to open it up to the floor again, so do prepare questions. But Leisha, can we come back to the point around the evidence is there for prevention, and the urgency is there to do something different at the moment? Why is it not happening? What have we learned about why? Other than the house building kind of blockers is stopping more preventative ways of working?
I think some of the key what needs to be done we've known for a while, and there's good enough evidence behind them. So accelerating the rate at which affordable houses are built being an obvious one, but the how is a different matter. Like Hannah was saying, it's actually a very difficult thing to do, and we can't shy away from that. So that's one of the things that's been stopping us, I guess. It's we know the what's the problem, and loads of research and resources have been thrown at the what and what the problem is, but the how do we actually do something about it? There's been a lot less investment in that area. It's what's referred in the report as the implementation gap. And this happens not just around things like house building, but also how to implement certain big pieces of legislation. So a good example being the Homelessness Reduction Act. Incredible implications, really important measure that really helped address a prevention gap, if you like, in the system, but not enough resource was put towards the implementing, to support local authorities across the country do it as well as possible. And that type of thing has consequences. And that's not something that's specific to a political, specific political party either, or government, if you like. So these are things that we need to really focus on, the implementation gap, because we often have strong legislation, but when it comes to supporting local areas across the country do their job properly, sometimes there's gaps, which is why you see so much variability across performance between local authorities. So we need to support LAs with things like, making sure that they're collecting the data around outcomes, not just outputs, and making sure that they're counting what matters, for instance. So it's about going back to some basics. So because some of these problems, they're problems that no one wants to see, but they're very difficult to solve. And identifying the problem isn't, but the execution is, if you like. The other one is around public opinion. So I think Vicky is onto something there in relation to that, because it's true that sometimes the public, it's not always easy, we know from polling, to get the public support for prevention, because they don't often know what that means. It feels vague to them, which is what I hope the discussion paper will help with as well. What does it actually mean in practice? And reality is, in practice, if you do believe in prevention, you believe in things like, paying your taxes and making sure that people have access to financial assistance. So we can't shy away from having those conversations either. Often the public, they don't know, they don't quite get what we mean by prevention. The same with politicians. So we need to make it as easy as possible. We also need to challenge the stigma attached to to homelessness, which is why actually the initiative by the Prince of Wales, homewards, is actually a good thing, and where it's definitely not overlapping with the government. The government can't do something like this, and it feels an important gap, helping to challenge the stigma associated with homelessness. No matter what the evidence suggests, a lot of the time people still feel it's to do with that particular individual, with that particular family, and sometimes somehow we feel they're lacking something, when a lot of the time, the reality is their starting point in life was very different, and circumstances led them to that particular situation. So this is why we keep going on about the role of communities, the role of individuals, and everyone, no matter who you are and your place in society, everyone being able to do something. So what he's doing is very risky, actually, for a member of the royal family, and he's sticking his neck out and actually trying to talk about the issue and helping address some of that stigma. So again, that's something that needs to happen to help prevent homelessness and make sure that everyone is doing their bit.
Thank you. I wanted to come back to the point about implementation, because that feels like a real gap there. When you look at local authorities that are doing this well, compared with local authorities that aren't doing this well, what's the difference? Do you have any insights into kind of the different leadership styles or activity? What's the difference?
Well, that's a very good question. I don't think you can point to a local authority that is, doing everything they could do across the board. There's, but LAs that are definitely forging a particular path, I guess, around prevention. They do tend to have that mix of great leadership across different levels, and having that inquisitive mindset, always trying to do better and being very data-led. And always trying to make sure that, of course, they're aware of the things they can't control, because local authorities have to work with many constraints around them, but they're always focusing on the things they can do given other constraints. So there's always a combination of those ingredients, if you like, and looking out, being in dialogue with the government at national level, being well networked with other local authorities. They're highly networked LAs as well, always trying to learn and do more with it they have, and trying to capture things that are in their way, to share that knowledge with organizations like ours, so we can help support them and also flag the issues with the government.
Thank you. Any more thoughts? Lady at the back, please.
Hi. So this is music to my ears, and the main reason is I've been working in homelessness. I've been working in homelessness prevention. So I work for Bridges Outcomes Partnership, and we're an impact investor. We done co-production of a prevention service with Brent in 2018, following the introduction of the HRA. This service has been replicated across a number of London authorities as well as Norfolk, and we're looking at increasing that further. What we found is that with prevention services, our biggest issue has been quantifying what we've stopped. What have we actually prevented, and how do we quantify that? So we are super data-led. I can tell you exactly how many people we've prevented homelessness for, what kind of tenancies they moved into, how we sustained that over a year, and what the outcomes from that were. And this is going back to the language again about not outputs, but outcomes. So what we don't do is develop a transactional service. We develop a relational service. And that goes from everywhere from the individuals we interact with and provide the service to the relationships we build with landlords, where we don't pay incentives. I absolutely refuse to pay incentives. What we do instead is build those relationships and also understand what is their priorities. And their priorities are not always about money. It's about having long-term tenancy success. So we've taken the system as it is, and we understand what the challenges are, and we found ways to work within it. My challenge right now to roll this service out further is procurement. So if I want to roll this service out, we have to go through a lengthy procurement process with every single London authority. And the ones we're working with are happy to do that because they understand the value of our service. With new authorities, it's a challenge. So then the question is, how do we resolve that? We create a framework. However, none exist right now, and nobody is interested in creating a framework. So that's my next challenge for the next year, to actually create a framework. But I just wanted to give some hope to you guys that there are prevention services out there. And when they are run as payment by results type contracts, you have the surety of value for money for the local authority, the individuals actually receiving outcomes, and the longevity of success of those outcomes. Because the other important thing, and you've all touched on it, is about the vulnerability of individuals. Why are we supporting them? What we should be doing is empowering them. We need to move away from this revolving door of homelessness support and actually give permanent solutions to individuals. And the great thing about outcomes contracts is I'm not process driven. I don't have to deliver it in any particular way. We can innovate and change the experience for every individual so that it meets their needs. So a really quick example is when we look for properties for individuals, we don't do it. What we do is we empower them. We show them how to search for accommodation. We show them what their rights are as individuals and tenants. And then we explain to them what the landlord's obligations are. What we do is coach them and guide them on the journey. So that if in the future, 2 or 3 years down the line, they're issued of a Section 21, they know exactly what to do to get another home. And this is the difference. This is what we need to change. We need to change not only the way we deliver our services, but the way we treat individuals as well. I'm going to leave it there.
Fantastic, thank you. Come to our colleague on the front here. I'm going to put some of your points to the panel to wrap up. Let's take a final section.
Yeah, hi. Sorry, my name is Veronica, and I'm actually homeless at the moment. That's why I'm here. And what this lady said just now made sense, and Vicky as well. There was a lot of people said a lot of different things, but it's very difficult to take everything in. I just want to say that I don't know, the government, I don't think they're doing enough, in my opinion. And they've just been talking for years, as in, this is like my 5th time or 4th time being homeless now. It's like a revolving circle, you know. Everything becomes okay, and then it gets to a point, and then all because I'm renting all the time. I'm not on social housing. I've never been on social housing before. I've always been privately rented, and with the amount of rent I've paid, by now, if I should be able to, I don't know, buy my own house. I've paid so much money to a landlord. It's ridiculous. Here I am again, like the 4th or 5th time being homeless. Now I belong to Ealing Council. That's where I'm from, Ealing Borough, and they've been terrible from years now. They've done nothing for me. Maybe I was speaking for other people as well. I'm sure it's just not me. There's a lot of people that are homeless like me as well on the streets, domestic abuse and all kinds. So, and people think when they see you, you know, coming, maybe wear a normal shirt or jumper, they find it difficult to believe that you could be homeless. You must be on the streets, literally on the ground, for you to be considered as homeless. No, like I said, it's like the 4th, 5th time. I've got a son. He's 26 years, and since he was born, we've been in this situation, and he's 26 years old now. And obviously, we were living together, but for now, we've had to like separate because it wasn't sustainable anymore. And right now, as we speak, the council, well, so they say they're trying to see what they can do, but this has been going on since February now, and we're in July. And when I heard what Prince William said, I was actually in one of the hotel rooms, homeless, like I think it was in June or was it May when he was saying it on the telly. And he actually caught my hand. I was like, oh, well, if he's actually serious about it, this could actually be the breakthrough, because as far as I'm concerned, all the governments, whether it's conservative or Labour or whoever, they're just kind of saying the same thing all the time. No, nothing is changing. It really isn't. And there's problems everywhere. Not enough homes, yes, true, social housing homes. And then the private renting as well is so high. Like my situation started during the lockdown, the pandemic time. That was when I couldn't afford. I was struggling to pay my rent. I was living in a 2-bedroom flat. So it was me and my son. He had one room, I had another room as well in Edinburgh there. And it got to a point. My landlord was actually a good landlord. She was very good. She was kind. She was actually good. She didn't like obviously kick us out. But when we started struggling with the rent, she was actually patient. She said, "Do you know what? You can even apply for housing benefit. Because everybody is struggling during the lockdown," which we did through the estate agent that was dealing with property then. So the problem with me now, the reason I'm in this situation is back to the government policy, because they refuse to pay the rent, the full rent. So, for example, if my rent was like £1,600 a month, they decided to, obviously now they've called it universal credit, so they lump everything together. I don't even know which is which. Initially, back in the day, it was job skills allowance. You get your separate whatever, then the housing is separate. But now they've lumped everything together. So, and it's like, oh, we can only pay you a certain amount. I said, but my rent is this amount. If I don't pay this amount, I'm going to be kicked out. And they said, well, sorry, there's nothing we can do. This is the government policy that was done since 2010 or whatever, David Cameron, whatever. There's like a cap or something like that. They have to remove some money or whatever. So at the end of the day, I was like, maybe out of £1,600, maybe they're paying like £1,000 or 900, and they expect to go and add the rest. And I don't know, where am I supposed to get the rest? And I'm looking for work as well at the same time on the side, which is difficult to get as well. And then I'm supposed to pay my bills and electricity, everything with this, whatever that they've given me, And then obviously I told my landlord that this was happening. I showed up the proof, like from my university credit, like online. And so I couldn't pay the full rent. I was paying a very small amount. I still paid my rent up to the very end, but I wasn't paying out the full rent. I was paying very minimum because I had to pay the electricity bill and the gas bill and everything inside that amount. And so they had to get evicted, which is the normal procedure. She didn't want to do, but that was the only. It was unfair for her as well because she had a mortgage to pay and stuff like that. So at the end of the day, I was very reluctant. I didn't want to go to the council, most especially in council, because I know that, for 26 years, they did nothing when my kid was young. I don't know if they're going to be doing something now that is older. And anyway, somehow, I don't know, I ended up in a hotel. Part of the money I was getting, I was using it to pay the hotel room. I had to borrow money from people, even from abroad. People like maybe give me money to just sustain me. And then when I run out of the cash, I ended up going to the airport. I've actually slept in the airport as well. No, it's just not me. I'm sure other people have experienced it as well. I'm telling you how people end up in these situations, literally from on top. So I've been in the airport maybe altogether like a month. Not like continuously. Maybe do 2 days here and there when I'm out of cash and sleep at it. They know me. Even the security have to kick me out at the end of the day. And from there, I've had to sleep even McDonald's. But you're not sleeping. You sat down, 24 hours because they open 24 hours. And the security had to tell me, well, you can't sleep in the airport, which is true, it's the law. You're not allowed to sleep in the airport. And they said, well, you can go to McDonald's. So I'm just telling my experience. I've had to go to McDonald's, which you can't sleep, you just have to sit there with your bag.
And one of the things I'm hearing in what you're saying is not only the real lived experience of everything we've been talking about today, but an additional thing, which is where we could prevent homelessness by changing government policy.
Yes.
Where the government policy is actually
driving because if they were
not meeting the rent.
Yes, because if they were paying that rent, my landlord was happy. Initially, it wasn't a housing benefit flat, don't get me wrong. But because of the situation of the pandemic, a lot of landlords, I think, allowed people to apply when you lost your job or whatever. So I did reluctantly. I didn't even want to, trust me, but I had to do it. So, and then here I am today, and it's been the council are still on my case as I speak, but when they've done like an assessment, they told me, oh, sorry, no priority because I'm not disabled. That was the excuse. And then they said, oh, even though my son has asthma as well, from when he was off till now, that was not even good enough. And this asthma kind of got worse from staying. We were in the airport. I've got proof. I'm not just making it up. I really have the proof of all this that is happening. It was through the airport. There was a homeless charity called Thames Reach. linked to Illinois salt, so they had to come to the airport through this security guards that were there. Because a lot of people do end up sleeping in the airport, just like I do. So they have like a section that does like try to bring people out of that situation. So Thames Ridge kind of took up my case dealing with Alien Council. So that's where we're at right now. And even with that, I'm still homeless and I don't have a place. As in, Illinois Salt is trying their best, but it's not enough because there's no temporary accommodation. As far as they're concerned, I'm not disabled, so they just don't care. As far as I'm concerned, now I'm surfing in different. I'm just moving around. At the moment, I've just come from Kent this morning, and I was 2 days ago. I was told to leave from sleeping on someone's sofa.
Well, can I thank you so much for spending the time and coming to share your experience today? And I'd like we'd love to talk to you afterwards about how your experience could help articulate some of the problems that we've been talking about today, because we can talk about all the theories, but actually your experience hammers home the issues.
There was something I noticed. There's like a loophole, which I'll discuss with you later. When, like, I know Vicky had a point, you made that a point as well. But what I noticed, there's like a slow. I've found many places of shelter, central point, all those people, and nothing has happened because all the policies they have in place is not. It's just you have to be referred through the council or be through something for 3 months. So the process, there's no actual place to go to say, oh, you know what, stay here for a week or stay here. Or even when I was in the hotel, I told the council.
Ben, will you pick this up afterwards?
I think it's really
important.
I asked the council to pay for where I was. That would have been the easiest solution. They couldn't even do that. You understand? They just don't. I don't know if it's all the boroughs, but Illinois borough is terrible. It's one of the worst boroughs I've ever dealt with when it comes to housing. So they need something out of them. Just don't. I think if they do care, something will actually happen. I don't think they do. But I was actually in a hotel. I was saying them the house. I said, look, you don't have to find me. I'm already in a hotel. All you have to do is just pay for the place, and then that's what makes you for you to.
I'm also hearing just the frustration of trying to navigate the system. So Veronica, thank you so much for coming and sharing that experience. I'm conscious that we do need to start to wrap up. Your point on spend to save and how you prove that, I think, is a really critical kind of part of the puzzle as well. But I just wonder if I could come back for the last word to Paula. Do you think Keir's talking about prevention across a lot of work in public services? How much do you think that's going to be delivered? And also, kind of, what would a mission for homelessness look like?
Okay, well, first of all, before I answer that, just to say thank you to Veronica for sharing your experience. We know how difficult it must be, and thank you for getting here today. It really is important that we hear lived experiences. I think Keir is incredibly committed to the prevention agenda and to making people's lives better. And I think sometimes people are frustrated that we keep hearing, we need to be fiscally responsible and we need to stay within, fiscal spending limits and all those things. And I get that. But one of the things that I would say is that, when we spend government money, it's your money. And we have to prove 10 times more than any other government that we are going to be responsible with your money and that we are giving value for money. So I think it is frustrating at times, but we do want people to understand that we are taking this incredibly seriously. In terms of the overall mission, I think it has to be my sort of third sort of mission, which is breaking and ending the cycle of homelessness, and obviously prevention will be the core pillar of that, I think. And I think, rough sleeping and temporary accommodation are incredibly important in that as well, because obviously we do have people in both of those pillars, but breaking the cycle of homelessness for me will be the core pillar and the driving force if I am Minister for Homelessness and Rough Sleeping going forward.
So I want to say a huge thank you to all our panelists for sharing their experience, to all our audience with all your rich experience, for spending the time with us this morning, to the Centre for Homelessness Impact for supporting this piece of work. We're going to party conferences with it, aren't we? Yeah, we've got events at party conferences, Labour and Conservative, focusing on this paper and the agenda. So if any of you are at those events, we would love to invite you there. But yeah, just a huge thank you to the panel and the audience. And there's more croissants and coffee as well, so do stick around for a chat. Thank you.